Morning, friends. Um, just rummaging through some of the literature that we have here in our lodge, without reading the Declaration per se, but presenting the Declaration in a different manner. This is the attempt today. Um, from Mr. Crosby's book of quotations on the ULT, he states that ULT is a name given to certain principles and ideas. Those who associate themselves with these principles and ideas are attracted and bound by them only, not by their fellows who do likewise, or who refrain, or who cease to consider themselves so bound. I don't have my glasses, so just bear with me. Sort of forgot them. And then in the key to theosophy, came across an interesting expression of HPB's. She was quoting from, I believe it was Dr. Buck. Well, anyway, it talks about the creed and ritual of theosophy, and it basically says that its creed is loyalty to truth, and its ritual to honor every truth by use. So, if one would say that theosophy has a creed, be such, it says also that there's no religion higher than truth. So you can see how it's honoring truth by loyalty. Its creed is loyalty to truth. Now, the association here, or the bond that holds the associates together, is basically stated in those few words. There's a commonality, aim, purpose, and teaching, and to present the teachings that have been handed down from the masters to the messengers to the inquirers. And the challenge here is to study, question, observe, to the extent that one is capable of, and to accept nothing unless proven by one's own self. Now, the lodge meets every Sunday at this hour, and then there are two meetings twice a month, in which time we're studying presently the Ocean of Theosophy by William King Judge. The reading today comes from the voice of the silence. Have patience, candidate, as one who fears no failure, courts no success. Fix thy soul's gaze upon the star whose ray thou art. The flaming star that shines within the boundless depths of ever being, the boundless fields of the unknown. Have perseverance, as one who doth for evermore endure. Thy shadows live and vanish, that which in thee shall live forever, that which in thee knows, for it is knowledge. Is not a fleeting life, it is the man that was, that is, and will be, for whom the hour shall never strike. If thou wouldest reap sweet peace and rest, disciple, sow with the seeds of merit the fields of future harvests. Accept the woes of thy birth. Step out of the sunlight into shade to make room for others. The tears that water the parched soil of pain and sorrow bring forth the blossoms and the fruits of karmic retribution. Out of the furnace of man's life and its black smoke, winged flames arise. Flames purified, that soaring onward neath the karmic eye, weave in the end the fabric glorified of three vestures of the path. These vestures are Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dhammanakaya, robes sublime. And now we will have the presentation for today.
Thank you. The four golden links. HPB mentioned the four golden links on page 233 of the key. she says, let me briefly remind you what these principles are. Universal unity and causation, human solidarity, law of karma, reincarnation. These are the four links of the golden chain which should bind humanity into one family and one universal brotherhood. On what should we base these truths? How do we reconcile this statement in our own lives as duty and as well as cosmic principles that find its expression in us?
You're looking for
the first one is universal unity and causation. Where do we come from? Why should this be important? Where do we come from and how is this unity established? Well, we have in recent days have given talks where we discuss the origin of energy or a spiritual force coming into the manifested universe through the one. So we see that one that initiates the radiation and gives out that forceful light, the ray, that is going to become the all, initiates from this point here, and you can look at it also this way, okay, because when we represented it this way, it's the apex of the triangle. So here it is, this is the one, this is where everything comes from. So humanity in that sense is dependent on this universal causation because we as a human family, the whole human family is all of humanity. From manu, men, and it also means mind. So here it is. We can think about it and how this then applies to our own principles as Atma, Buddhi, Manas, which is the permanent in us. So human solidarity means then that whatever each one of us does, it affects everything else. Because we're united. When the explanation was given that there is one oversoul, then each human soul is a ray from that source. So our source is one, just like the sun shines and that bright, brilliant rays of the sun goes everywhere. So the human souls can be, in a similar fashion, identified in our own mind coming from that central sun. So it is based on the central spiritual sun. So if what we do affects everything else, then we need to be mindful of that and consider every human being a brother or a sister. And she says true solidarity comes about when all women are sisters and when all men are brothers, and that we consider ourselves as part of the other as the other is part of us. And on this then is based all of our social standing or social norm. And equality. We are told that what we wish for ourselves, more of it we have to give to the other. More of it, not as much of it. Then the law of karma is the third one. And I'm going to erase this. And HPB reiterates, and all of the writings are in this way, constantly reminding the West that this is one law that needs to be reinstated into our philosophical books. Law of karma, which then reincarnation, of course, follows, because these two cannot be separated from one another, are the two most important philosophical aspects that are missing from the Western philosophy and also Western life. Why is this important? Well, karma means the law of action with its reaction, or ethical causation. And we just saw that this causation comes from the universal, but it is also applicable to individuals that make the units make the whole. In other words, humanity is one body, one man, one manu. So whatever it is that we do, its effect comes back to us. And knowing that, no human being can continue to act without considering the consequences of the action that is going to others, because we cannot carry our actions without other people. It is done in company with others. So karma is also called the law of retribution. But it is not punishment, because we learn through experience. And we always make mistakes, and those mistakes are the ones that cause us tremendous pain. But without pain, we would continue on doing the same error. She tells us that pain is actually our savior, because this is what teaches us. If it comes back continuously, then we question, why is this happening to me? Experience and change as a result of that experience is important. And this is also the most important aspect of Buddha's teaching. When he talks about the Four Noble Truths, dukkha, or suffering, is the first noble truth, and the whole of his philosophy is based on that suffering. So pain and suffering is what teaches. And what is it that they're teaching us? In all of the philosophical foundations of every worthy religion, the same is inculcated. Ethics, morality, mindfulness, knowing that intent carries the highest debt, and that we need to be mindful of our thought, of our speech, and of our actions. Well, the Buddha, in his Noble Truths, tells us that we can find out why we are suffering, in other words, its root cause, and then we can eliminate that suffering, because we are causing it. So when we find out what is causing the suffering, we can remove it. Rather than the Buddha dealing with the root cause of things, he came up with dependent origination, because this is very understandable. What one cause leads to is its effect, but the effect in its turn becomes another cause. And for human beings to take the effect all the way to its beginning is a very difficult task. However, he says that his eightfold noble path enables one to reach to emancipation. So this here is exactly the same thing. The reincarnation is necessary for emancipation. Reincarnation then is the fourth of the golden links, and it is necessary because without reincarnation, if we are here just for one life, how much of that one life are we spending in actually doing things that change our path in the right direction towards truth? Because you have to remember, we're first children. We have to grow, become monastically responsible individuals. We sleep half of our lives away. So there's education involved depending how and why we have come to that environment in that particular life. We have to consider all that. So it doesn't really leave a whole lot of time to the consideration of our innocence and going towards spirituality. This actually is given 0 to 7 and then again 63 to 70 when we should be involved in our spiritual life during this period. So having said that, it's just the background. But there is a passage here in the key where it is stated, in sociology, as in all branches of true science, the law of universal causation holds good, but this causation necessarily implies as its logical outcome that human solidarity, on which theosophy so strongly insists. So that is one thing that must always be kept in the background of our minds. And then karma. The individual and separate karma we do have, but then we have a family karma, and then we have a national karma, and then humanity as a whole has a combined karma. So that unity, that solidarity is important to hold in the background. Justice is the law of karma because it is based on justice. What we do to others, then in return we also reap. She discusses these concepts as applied to humanity. She says humanity basically is divided into two groups. The mass of poor people with no resources. They're simply in pain, in suffering, and they have very little opportunity to move themselves out of this condition that they are in. The second class she calls the middle and the upper class. And she contrasts these two classes. In the first group, no resources, hardly any amenity. In the middle and upper classes, there is indifference, she says, and unidentification with what the poor masses are suffering through. Because this middle and upper class has resources. And she says, if justice and equality, kindness and love was the underlying motive power for our actions, then our main purpose would be to alleviate the pain and suffering of the poor classes, to give them an opportunity for emancipation first from those conditions, because this mass of poor people are unable, she says, to develop either physically, emotionally, or spiritually, because their growth is stunted. growth is stunted. On the other side, there is material luxury, indulgence, so this is attachment to materialistic side of our nature. But she says our character is developed by improving and persistently going towards the higher expression of ourselves. So, character, now, character is built up from the past, from the present, but we're going to come back and face it in the future. So for this, improvement comes I'll write it here, from developing our higher nature. So our character then is built and becomes noble if we are trying to include the noble qualities in us. What are those noble qualities? Well, there's a whole list of them in the Gita. But one aspect is at all times discussed, altruism. Altruism is very necessary. The soul, it is stated, knows what it needs when it comes into incarnation. Its integrity is complete, and altruism is part of that, because it knows that it is part of the one. So solidarity, unity is in its core. Justice, since karma brings us back, is its core. Kamadeva, which is God of love, has another name, Makaraketu, and that love is for the benefit, or its concern is for the whole, not for the parts, for the whole. So love is in its core. Our soul then grows by the character moving towards the noble aspects of life, noble characteristics. How do we then become altruistic? And that goes towards sacrifice. Masters of wisdom, nirmanakayas, bodhisattvas, a whole galaxy of adepts, perfected beings. Most of them, after reaching emancipation, perfecting their natures, stay behind to help humanity. This is sacrifice. They don't expect anything in return, but they give it freely. They give of themselves freely to all those who wish to follow in their footsteps. So we then repeat this sacrifice that is sort of enacted in heaven, because our core is that. And then these great beings who were just like us at one time and now have perfected their natures and remain to help humanity as nirmanakayas, bodhisattvas, and so forth, we can emulate the best in us like they do. What is it? HPB's recommendation is that we have arrived at this if we beneficently, without any thought to ourselves, can give to the other, and can give more of it to the other than to ourselves. That gauge, this student wasn't aware of before. Only for this talk did it kind of come up to the forefront. Sacrifice is everywhere. but that you can give more of it to the other than to yourself. And Apollonius of Tyana is a very good example, because his life story is written, and in it, when he became a neophyte, he assumed the Pythagorean style of living and gave all of his property, not all of it, half of his property to his brother, who had used all of his property by that time. They were rich, and the other half he divided amongst the poor. He gave all of it away. But this student also is very realistic. When you're perfected, somehow those beings know how to survive in the world without having anything. Whereas we, as living in a community, are perhaps situated differently, and sustaining ourselves is a little bit different than theirs. So sacrifice and altruism then is at the core. The law of karma applies equally to all, although all are not equally developed. So when we are considering these two aspects, we need to understand that everybody is not at the same point of development. These poor classes, their growth is stunted, and it becomes our utmost duty to help in any way that we can help them, to move them out of that constricted environment into emancipation, so that they can also grow in mind, in soul, and in spiritual life. Because these poor people don't have any means of livelihood. All their activity is just for survival. And that is what assumes their time and energy at all times. And about reincarnation, once grasp the idea that universal causation is not merely present, but past, present, and future, and every action on our present plane falls naturally and easily into its true place, and is seen in its true relation to ourselves and to others. There is one other thing that this student would like to touch upon. The question was, is the natural result of the desire to live and continue on is dependent by quitting our present condition? And the answer is, if you mean by such desire suicide, then I say most decidedly not. Such a result can never be a natural one, but is ever due to a morbid brain disease or to most decided and strongest materialistic views. It is the worst of crimes and dire in its results. But if by desire you mean simply aspiration to reach a spiritual existence, not a wish to quit the earth, then I would call it a very natural desire. Because contentment, as we can see, is not a quality of this generation. There is tremendous discontentment in our social environment, and that discontentment comes mainly because we're stuck on material things. We want more and more everything. But the key is to be appreciative of what one has and put it to greater use of what one has. And then satiation is not something that is achieved by desiring more and more, but contentment comes from understanding that we're not material things, but simply that we're in material conditions at this time, but in the future ages to come, we will use less and less of material, in the sense that we will uplift all of the material around us, and so our soul life will be different, our environment will be different, but if only we embrace altruism, sacrifice, and all of the nobler qualities of justice, love, consideration of the other, and incorporate those into our daily lives. And now we will open it to questions.
Could you summarize the four again, please?
Yes.
I see you have three up there. The fourth one, in summary, is what?
The fourth one is reincarnation.
Oh, okay. We got karma. We got reincarnation. The first one was universal unity.
And causation.
And causation. And number
Second
four.
is human solidarity.
Human solidarity. Okay.
Karma and reincarnation. These are normally called the twin doctrines. One without the other does not really exist, because without reincarnation, emancipation and perfectibility then goes out of the window. Yeah.
In discussing noble characteristics, you mentioned the idea of beneficent altruism and how it would inherently involve sacrifice. My question is, why would that situation be inherently greater than a sort of beneficent win-win where there's mutual reception? My guess is that reception has traditionally been seen as demonic, but I'm wondering if you're altruistically giving to someone, you're then demonizing the other person if they're in the receiving situation. So I'm just wondering why a beneficent win-win would be inherently less than a altruistic sacrifice.
You mean giving yourself equal amounts as well as giving away equal amounts?
Yeah, you're generating off the other in a mutual receptive situation where it's sort of you're both receiving and you're both sharing, rather than one giving, exchanging to the other.
Well, it is stated that the masters give of themselves to each and everyone, and that all of their energy is used in regenerating humanity towards a spirituality. All of their energy. It doesn't say they're using it on themselves. So there must come a time when you're spiritually developed and your inner life is synthetic, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like coordinated, but it is synthetic. In other words, it has become a whole in itself. There's another word that I'm not coming up with it. Synthetic does not mean here it's not real. Synthesized into a whole is what it means. Synchronized. Synchronicity. Well, that is not the one either, but
I've seen synthetic used in the way you're trying to use
but
it.
I don't want to make it look like it's not real.
Yeah, it's synthesized.
Synthesized.
Yeah, it's to combine, right?
Yeah. United. Let's put it united.
United. Okay.
United, and it becomes composite. That at this stage, self doesn't come into it anymore, because what have you done? You have superseded it. The self meaning the personality, okay? So personality drops, and I will explain what that means. When this word is used, it means it is in accord with the higher. With the higher aspect, with the higher ego. You do no longer consider yourself as a separate unit from everything else, but you understand your unity. You are a composite being within yourself, but you have become more and more associated with the all. Your consciousness is so enlarged, it's inclusive of all the others. And it is stated that first it starts with your family. When Mr. Judge has an article called The Living the Higher Life, and in that one he discusses this exact thing, that once you remove the impurities or defects from yourself that belongs to your family line, you have removed it from all of them. And then it becomes your responsibility knowingly to come back to the same family in each incarnation, and enabling all the other members of the family to elevate themselves. And there's a reason for that, because he says eventually the family becomes so pure, a Buddha can incarnate into such a family or reincarnate into such a family. So purity is also very important, and the Zoroastrian religion is based on Ashoy. So at this stage, that looks like half and half is a good equilibrium in your mind. But as we go on this path towards altruism, towards equality, towards justice for all, that kind of drops off. It's no longer your concern.
So when everyone reaches a state of altruism, who's benefiting?
All. The all. Because your concern is for the benefit of the all. We just said human solidarity. We're all one human body, one human family. Yes, the large human family is made of smaller families, and the smaller families all belong to different nations. But she says in the future, all that stuff is going to drop. We're going to be a one lip, in other words, one language, Sanskrit, one religion, truth, and we're going to be one human family, representing the mind, which is then going to have expression without impediment from substance. The mind is going to be supreme in the next round. So, as we go along, the higher ego, the lower self is then in the service of the higher ego. It no longer interferes with anything. It doesn't come into play. Dupree, would you like to add to that?
Just a comment more so than a question. When you spoke of earlier about the rich and poor, and I came across some thoughts about how the poor always try to mimic the rich, and the rich take advantage of the poor and
psychologically,
right, and exploit the poor, and the poor is trying to become like the rich because they think that that's the way out and up. And another thing that the masses, you mentioned the poor masses, the mass mind is so encrusted with dogma and doctrines could be from the rich and could be from the priesthood, and the mass mind has been so perverted, perverse, and it's this solidarity that you speak of, bringing it down to an everyday level. You have like I believe there was in Poland was the solidarity movements, Lech Wałęsa, stuff like that. And this thing, since you is bringing sociology and things like this into play in families, the average family is basically just trying to, they're locked into that survival of the fittest thing, and they view life as a struggle coming from that Darwinian evolution, what's that thing about the strongest survive and all that? And the average person working for their family is not concerned with the other family down the street, around the corner. So there's this ignorance and selfishness that's another term for it. That's sort of like built around the minds of the average day working mother or father. They're just concerned with their own. So how do you get to that person? There may be a nice church-going person, but in their church, they're thinking that I'm the best. There's this exclusiveness, their sect that they're in, and all others are not as good as mine. So this universal truth that Theosophy presents seems to be up against a hard wall, in other words. So what is that beam of light that you speak of from the central self or sun? How does that get through all that?
Well, what you say has truth in it. But remember, what age are we, Kali? What else is it? Transition. And we are told that the old modes of thinking that some people are not able to let go because they're grappling at it, because they don't have anything better to replace it with. But if you look at our society, there's a lot of minds who are inquiring. And this is the key. So what we need to do is what we are told: bring the poor masses through opportunity and help to this stage. Because all of their lives are concerned about survival, just like you have mentioned. Because they don't have the resources and they're constantly struggling, because there is disparity. On the other side, there is so much wealth, people have billions, they don't know what to do with it. Because in one sense, it's being stolen from the other side. Just because you earned it on the stock market, that is not a real earning, is it? That's manipulation. So, inquiring minds are the ones that grapple with these issues. The poor, she says, are not in that condition, and it is the duty of the privileged side to help those who are poor to be emancipated socially. In other words, bring them to a point where they have a good standard of living, and their minds can then be freed from the drudgery of constantly thinking, how am I going to survive from today to tomorrow, because they don't have enough resources to do that. So inquiring minds is the stage where they need to be brought to.
Well, as a follow-up quickly.
Yeah.
So now, if a person understands karma and the universe or things are the way they're supposed to be, because everything is under law.
This is where the cycle
right.
for it.
So why bother? You know, if these people are suffering because of their karma and that's law, so where's that thin line of helping and not helping?
Okay. It's necessary to help. Sorry, reincarnation goes with this. Perhaps we should put number 4 here. Reincarnation. So I don't keep deleting it. Okay? This is where the astral comes in. Astral life. In that article, Living the Higher Life, Mr. Judd says, if one of us become a good example, and by our mode of living and actually getting involved in helping. In other words, our help is not by word of mouth, but through action. It's recorded. It's recorded in the astral life. And he says, one of us can move that in that direction. That once this is imprinted, other like-minded people are affected and they move in the same direction. And this is how change comes about.
I also agree with the notion that a duty is to help those currently suffering in impoverishment reach a certain level of abundance for there to be room for development. And I think that might reject the notion that traditionally vilifies materiality as being inherently evil.
But this help is not just materiality. We're talking about giving them psychological support, because without that they are not really successful. They kind of fall back. Just in other words, there are communities where this physical help was given, but when you go and look at their houses, they're dilapidated, they don't take good care of it. So you have to give them in the South, I have seen this happen, psychological support, mental support, and also spiritual support. She says to put new wine in old bottles is not a good idea. You have to help them change from inside out. And the other part I wanted to address to you, and I will come to you, Carolina, next, was that this is an internal process at the same time. This awakening of the soul to its own possibilities is an internal thing. But if there is nothing on the outside to change the need for a better one, then where is society moving towards? An anthropomorphic God doesn't do that, because it takes the responsibility away from human beings, because I'm responsible for what I think, I'm responsible for what I say, I'm responsible for what I do. Nature does not forgive. It gives another chance to bring that disharmony I created in the world back to its core, which is harmony. Carolina?
It's interesting how Madame Blavatsky wrote about poverty, and she could define very well what they're going through, and this was in 19th century without her having traveled to the places where there are extreme poverty. She had traveled elsewhere, but not, for example, today extreme poverty is located in sub-Saharan countries and small island economies, Southeast Asia and East Asia. And there are 1.2 billion people living in extreme poverty. It means that they don't have access to water and access to food or shelter, and then also they suffer from diseases that are controllable. Yeah, controllable in the Western economies, but not in those locations such as malaria and parasites. And I agree with your comment that they're not concerned with the spiritual development, because they're concerned with surviving today.
Yep.
They don't know if they're gonna eat today and if their children are gonna survive the day.
Yes.
Because, and I don't agree with the comment that Dupree said that the poor are trying to copy or emulate what the rich are doing. They don't. Perhaps he's talking about a different population, but extreme people living in extreme poverty, they're not even concerned. They don't know how the rich live.
Yeah, most of them don't read and write.
It's perhaps the lower middle classes that they're trying to emulate the rich, but not the poor. The poor.
The poverty-stricken areas are truly in a mire, because they're not able to get themselves out. They need help to be able to move from that environment to a better one. And education comes into it too. You know, to be able to read and write. How are you going to become aware of what is going on elsewhere? These people don't have any radios. They don't have any means of reading, writing. They have absolutely nothing. They do not. Their children are in the same areas, now left without parents because of AIDS. They have this other problem: children raising children. Malaria too.
One element that should be brought in here is the churches, be it the Buddhist, Hindu, Roman, Catholic Church, or Christian Church. Something like that's a two-edged sword, because priestcraft have dominated a lot of these folks, and a lot of these people have been taught that they're weak and dependent. You mentioned that original dependency, stuff like that. And this is God's will that you're in this situation. And so they look for substance or relief from the priest. And as you say, poverty or drudgery can become divine sometimes it strengthens the individual as well. So if these folks have that, if they can find the self and become dependent upon that self, but that self has become so abstract, and all the self that they have is this little one life image of the self, depending upon how they have depending on how it's been given to them through the priest. So, but at the flip side of that, churches do help ameliorate the physical side of these people by food, education, and stuff like that. But the overall improvement or amelioration of their psychological and spiritual condition, they are still victims of churchcraft.
Okay, but
just one comment adding to yours, Dupree. It's not just the churches; it's cultural beliefs also that hinder the progress.
Yeah. But let me just make this one comment. All that is stated is true, but until the poor has been brought to that position of social emancipation, they're not able to think on these lines that are presented by you today, Dupree. because the church is there. Yes, it is dogmatic, and it does imprint on their minds, because for the help that they give, in return, they expect faithfulness and not questioning and so forth. However, everywhere theosophical writings state that it must not be stripped, that quality must not be stripped from them externally, that when they come to that position of inquiry, then the soul awakens to its own possibilities from within, outside. If you strip people of their belief system, they don't have anything else to hold to. They become even worse, hopeless. So we need to be very careful in that regard.
Also, just a thought, a contribution here. You also mentioned capitalism, stuff like that. And this is a transition age. You know, definitions are changing and new words are being created, like in the language, constantly. So, for instance, common sense, like going back to Thomas Paine, common sense. You know, like we're on a planet which is 2/3 water, and yet we have to pay for water. And you have younger people who are coming up of age that probably need to change the capitalistic model, which is based on competition instead of cooperation. If profit is there, but if you can show that through cooperating, you can still acquire profits. So just like people want to be free, you got that in Europe right now, throughout the whole planet. So it's this upsurge of freedom and the transition, but at the same time, we're going into a Kali Yuga. So I can see extreme poverty, but no examples of extreme light. In other words, you know how they say it'll get worse before it gets better.
But we must not also judge the poverty levels just by physical means, because poverty of spirit is everywhere too. What about the cultured classes? They all think they know everything. They all think that they have arrived. But where have they arrived at? HPB helped those classes too when she was here on earth. So just physical deprivation is not what this age is suffering from. The spiritual deprivation is just as important.
While you're finishing that, well, you already finished, but just a little quick comment.
Yes?
In this student's life, he has run into some people that I'm not sure they knew where the next meal was coming from, but they were very enlightening when you talk with them. So the condition you're born into is really not defines who you are. Mm-hmm. It is how you manage whatever situation you're in. Yeah. Sometimes you choose to be born into a very poor situation. It's suffering, it's learning, and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, the same token, Daddy always said he was relatively poor, but he said it's not the money, it's the love of money. And the idea is if you've got the resources, you turn around and try to help. You think you know you have different responsibilities.
Absolutely. Learn to share it. Consider yourself a custodian. So spiritual deprivation is everywhere, as we can see, because it comes from that materialistic attitude that we're here one life span. Karma and reincarnation not being in the philosophical condition that we are in is not taught. So our children are growing up without knowing who or what they are, what their purpose in life is. So these are very important points. Seed ideas are very important in cultivating our children. So those need to be inserted by the theosophical student themselves into their own family, and perhaps generation after generation it will disseminate itself.
So then back to the root causes again of this notion, particularly in the Western nations, of individuality, coming all back from the materiality, starting with Aristotle westward, individuality, and then when the Europeans came to this land here, this idea of individual will and might conquering the West, the right, the individual. So from this materiality and the individuality, and along with the capitalism, that's for the Western. But so what do you attribute in the Eastern nations? The Eastern nations, Asia, Central India, Africa, those third, fourth world nations, they were brought up on this sense of cooperation, unlike capitalism in Europe. So where do you attribute all that poverty coming from, despite that social communism that they have, that native communism?
Well, that's a whole discussion on its own. But one idea is that you cannot think that you are poor and not exhibit that within yourself. Poorness is truly a state of mind. This is HPB. In the golden age, the poor are still there. But what is not there is the ones who are cultivated and with resources come to the aid of the poor without ever it being asked of them. And the poor know their own place and they cultivate themselves to move out of it. They are not ailing after rich material riches. Asoka is given as an example of that once he embraced Buddha's teachings, he stopped being a warring king and embraced the Buddhist way of life. He built roads, he built water fountains on the roads, he put places like inns where people could rest during their journey, he put fruit trees on the road so people could eat without going without food. And HPB in this article says that in many, many eras, the whole communities and nations follow this path. And that Kali Yuga, and especially the condition of the West and India, are similar. It doesn't mean all the other places on the universe are in Kali Yuga. She only mentions those two countries. And then in Mr. Judge's writings, China, honorable China is what he calls them, since they have stopped following the teachings of Confucius, they will disintegrate and eventually disappear. This is Student's statement, it comes from there. So China is going to disappear. What do they do today? They dishonor their forefathers' teaching. They do not honor Confucius at all. So honorable China is on the decline. Our weather is going to show radicality, and HPV says the broadcasters are going to have a tremendous difficulty engaging as to what is going to happen next. This is the coming of the age. We haven't seen it yet. We've just seen a little bit of it, that we're going to suffer extremes. And eventually we're going to have one kind of food, whatever that is. And those who have it are going to be very grateful to have it, and we're going to be happy to have it. So a lot worse is going to come unless the theosophical students who understand the importance of interjecting this mode of living into our children and whoever else is willing to listen, because there are a lot of inquirers out there, that if we can move one other mind in the true direction so that they can come to understand who or what they are and what their inner nature is, then we're doing our work. Now, thank you.
How about Philadelphia, May 3rd?
Oh, yes. There is going to be an interlot symposium on May the 3rd at the Philadelphia Philadelphia Lodge, Chestnut Street, and I had written the topic here. Moral Decisions is the general title. A theosophical approach to everyday ethics is what is going to be discussed under the different sections, and that is May 3.
We are planning to go, and there are 2 seats that are available in our car, and anybody wants to